Hello everyone, welcome to my Resident Evil 0 hard difficulty, no damage walkthrough, and this is going to be the training facility all the way to the basement area. Just because the training facility lasts for quite a long time and I wanted to split up the video into two parts, and also because SHAREfactory did the exact same thing, and I definitely think that made his walkthrough flow better. And yes, you heard me right, SHAREfactory did actually do a walkthrough of this game. It was no healing walkthrough, and it was a pretty decent walkthrough. Yeah, he showed a lot more competence when it came to perfecting the strategies in his walkthrough than in the other Resident Evil games. Quite ironic when you think about it. So at the beginning, I went for the crank handle, and now we're just coming into this room. We need to grab the microfilm, and then we need to use the crank handle to raise Rebecca up to the floor above us. And we're going to be introduced to a new enemy type, which is the Plague Crawler. And I discovered a really interesting strategy against the Plague Crawlers in this room while I was making this walkthrough. You're about to see it here. Make sure you give Rebecca the pistol as well, because she's very slow with the knife compared with to the pistol. And this is the strategy right here. Every time you shoot the Plague Crawler once, he's forced to walk forward, and then he actually starts turning. So I'm going to use this behavior to my advantage to eliminate the Plague Crawlers, because they spawn one at a time in this room upon first entering this room. And it really works well. This strategy, however, will not work on all the subsequent Plague Crawler encounters, because they're encountered in groups of 2, and there's never any moment where they spawn in one at a time. And the Plague Crawlers are pretty dangerous. They have a lot of range on their attacks. They have a jump attack which can hit you from off-screen, and it has some of the most ridiculous range ever. And, yeah, they're a pretty annoying enemy. They're more of a nuisance than an actual threat. Thankfully, they die pretty fast from the grenade launcher. I mean, they die from 2 grenades from the grenade launcher and then 1 incendiary round from the grenade launcher, but you want to save as many incendiary rounds as you can, because you're going to be trying to save all these incendiary rounds for the Bat Boss coming up in the church area of the game that precedes the laboratory section. Because that's really the only good way to fight the Bat Boss. Everything else is just really bad. Like, the Bat Boss is a boss that just demands a lot of speed. That's it. It's just a damage race against a boss that cheats. That's all that fight really is. But I'm not going to talk about it now. We're coming up on another boss fight, but before that, I'm going to try to collect the grenade launcher, and I'm also going to use the grenade launcher to kill these Plague Crawlers in this room, so that it makes it a lot easier to get through this room when I have to return to it. Because these Plague Crawlers are an absolute nuisance, because they constantly hit me every time I enter the room multiple times. So instead I'm just going to finish them off here. I'm running around in circles. I don't go for the grenade launcher immediately, because I want the bugs to be facing in a direction that's favorable, so that I can actually pick up the grenade launcher, because picking up the grenade launcher is really annoying. The fixed camera screws with your ability to actually pick up the object, and the detection on it is not the best. And I also wanted to pick up the white statue right there, because we need it for a puzzle. And also, getting these shotgun shells there while those Plague Crawlers are active is really annoying, because the developers, for some bizarre reason, decided to put a lot of text boxes around items you're supposed to pick up. It happens in the older Resident Evil games as well, but nowhere near to the same degree as Resident Evil 0. It's incredibly frustrating. Trying to pick up objects while there's a text box nearby, it's so painful. Because every time you try to go for those shotgun shells in that room, if you're not facing the shotgun shells in the right direction, your character keeps examining the painting that's right next to it, and it can delay you, it can allow the enemies enough time to attack you while you're trying to go for the shotgun shells, because you have to do this whole animation of picking up the shells. I mean, you're invulnerable while it's happening, but you're not vulnerable when you come out of the animation, and it's something you gotta avoid. That's why I killed those Plague Crawlers. This is the Centurion boss fight. This is not really a boss fight, this is more so a time fight, because you have to kill this boss before he kills Rebecca. And thankfully you can do this fight with the pistol only, because this boss dies in about 1 minute, so long as you're at the right range, because the pistol does more damage, depending on how close you are to the enemy. Distance doesn't really matter with this fight, because this guy seems to take very consistent damage, regardless of your distance. But since you're not really doing much, I decided to speed up the fight, because what would I be talking about? And now we have access to the fire key. and we're going to be using the fire key to gain access to some lighter fluid. And we're also going to be using the fire key to gain access to a clock needle that we need to do a puzzle, which will allow us to unlock some rooms. And that's how we're going to proceed from here. There are going to be several zombies in the way, but thankfully they aren't so much of an issue because the pistol is really good against them. You know, the pistol's always been such a reliable tool, but compared to Resident Evil 1, the pistol on this game is a lot more reliable when it comes to knocking over the zombies. Because for the most part, the zombies get knocked over after about 3 or 4 shots, depending on your distance. And they die really fast. They take roughly 7 to 9 shots to die completely. And the way you can tell that a zombie's dead is when they make a specific sound effect, or when you see the blood pool around their dead bodies. And it's a really nice bit of feedback. For the most part, the zombies on this game are a pretty balanced enemy. I like the fact that you can knock them over with the knife, because if you do 2 knife hits to the leg, or sometimes 3, which is a bit bizarre, that can happen sometimes, it will knock over the zombie, and then you can proceed to knife him on the ground. Then you have to repeat it a bit, because you're not going to be able to finish him off with the knife, because the knife does very little damage in this game. And speaking of the knife, compared to the other Resident Evil games, specifically the older ones, it's not possible to do this game knife only, unless you're just slotting into a lot of healing items, which, if you're having to slot into a lot of healing items to do a restricted run, then it's clear that this game is not designed for such a restricted run. Now, I know a lot of people may be a bit annoyed by the fact that Resident Evil 0 is not possible to do knife only, but it doesn't impact me in the slightest. Because of the fact that it's not possible to do knife only, it means that the weapons actually serve a purpose, and for the most part, the weapons on this game are really fun to use. And not only that, but just like Resident Evil 7, I feel like each of the weapons on this game serves a particular purpose at a particular point in the game. You know, the pistol's so reliable against zombies, the shotgun's very good against the monkeys later on, and against certain bosses. The grenade launcher is another good alternative for bosses, because it's going to help us kill the Bat Boss, it's going to help us deal with Marcus, it's going to help us deal with hunters, because acid rounds are consistent when it comes to stunning hunters. And then the Magnum is really good for finishing off any high-powered enemies. And it's really good against bosses as well. You know, the weapons actually feel reliable, and they feel like they affect the flow of the game if you have those weapons. Like, the game just flows better if you're using the weapons at very particular points. And I like that in a Resident Evil game. I mean, so what if you can't do it knife only? Like, as long as the weapons are good to use, and as long as they feel like they serve a purpose, I don't mind whatsoever. You know, I don't get that with Resident Evil 2 Remake, for instance, because of the fact that the weapons in Resident Evil 2 Remake are very boring to use, and they don't really feel that advantageous when it comes to dealing with certain sections. You know, I never use them. I only ever use the knife in Resident Evil 2 Remake, because I just feel like the knife's the only weapon that actually feels reliable. Because the sections are just designed in such a way that you never have to use any of the other weapons. So, like, why would you ever want to slot into the weapons at all? I mean, unless you're just doing it for weapon diversity's sake, or you're just bored with a knife-only run, I don't see any other reason to use the weapons in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Although I suppose for speedrun purposes, maybe having all the weapons in Resident Evil 2 Remake can actually be useful. But that's the only reason I can think of as to why you would want to use the weapons. Just for speedrunning purposes, and that's what I believe they were trying to go for Resident Evil 2 Remake. They were trying to harken back to what the Resident Evil games before Resident Evil 3 were like. Where Resident Evil was all about speedrunning, the enemies didn't have any kind of complexity to their mechanics, to their systems, to their behavior. And you just brush them aside, this and that. You know, they had not a lot of thought put into them, and that's what made speedrunning possible. But then Resident Evil 3 came out, and then they made the enemies a lot more lethal, and they had a lot more interesting systems to them. You know, there's a reason why they put in the turbo zombies. There's a reason why they made the hunters as agile as they were. There's a reason why Nemesis was a thing. It's because they tried to make you behave differently compared to what you were used to in the games before Resident Evil 3. Because you were a lot more agile in Resident Evil 3. You had a lot more creativity involved when it came to crafting ammo, for instance, and because of that, they had to make the enemies a lot more demanding. And the most ironic thing about this is that Resident Evil 3 was actually a Gaiden story, meaning that it was a side story. So, Ayuma-san, the director of Resident Evil 3, said that he wanted Resident Evil 3 to feel very different to the main Resident Evil games. It wasn't actually intended to be a main Resident Evil game, but it sort of became a main Resident Evil title. And because of the fact that it became a main Resident Evil title, it really changed Resident Evil to something incredible and unique. And something that felt so different to games like Silent Hill or Turok or Parasite Eve or those other fixed camera-based survival horror games that all played exactly the same. Like, when you just think about it, when you look at those game series, there's nothing about them mechanically that feels different. And then when you look at Resident Evil 3 and the games afterwards, their mechanics are so advanced and so innovative compared to your standard average game that Resident Evil became its own thing because of the fact that Resident Evil 3 released. And then we got very advanced games like Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 6, Resident Evil 7, the Revelation sub-series. Like, so many cool, innovative games, and then they reverted back to the older model of Resident Evil 2 Remake, where it wasn't as unique or as impressive like Resident Evil 3 was, and it really felt like Resident Evil 2 Remake lost the identity of a true Resident Evil game, and it really felt no different to your typical third-person survival horror game. Like, the only things that made it feel like a Resident Evil game were just things like the characters, because, I mean, they were the characters we all know and love, and then having the knife be very powerful, but that's about it. Like, the typical survival horror game likes to put more emphasis on lazy designs, such as not making enemies flinch, having the weapons feel underpowered and lacking any kind of feedback that's noticeable, and also giving enemies artificial handicaps to feign lethality. But then there are survival horror games that take the right approach to horror, and they do the right thing by taking influences from Resident Evil 4. And these games in particular are Dead Space, The Last of Us, and The Evil Within. The things that they do is that they make the weapons reliable and powerful. They provide certain vulnerabilities to the enemies to make them lethal but fair, and that should actually be the standard for an enemy to actually fear. And then they also have innovative mechanics, enemy designs, and level designs that barely any game uses to properly balance the game. Like, that amount of effort put into a survival horror game is something to be respected. And Resident Evil really tries to go out of its way to make these systems noticeable, innovative, and unique. But the fans of the Resident Evil series, unfortunately, they never ever try to experience any of these systems to such a great degree like I do. They don't try to understand the kind of impact these systems have on the survival horrorness of the Resident Evil series. That's why you see a lot of people complaining about the dodging in Resident Evil 3, how they say it's a bad thing to have the character be able to dodge. But do they not realize that giving the main character the ability to dodge forces the developers to try to make the enemies unpredictable, faster, and more lethal? The Resident Evil community is a pretty stupid community. I've said this so many times, I'm never going to stop saying it. Oh, this room right here. Server 17 apparently struggled with this section, but I don't see why, because I just knock out the zombie on the right, then I just kill the zombie on the left, and then I just lure all the zombies in a circle. I think Server 17 was trying to speed through this section, like the speedrunners do, but I imagine the speedrunners will try to use the partner zapping mechanic to do this room. And the partner zapping mechanic, if you don't know, is just another way of saying swap between Billy and Rebecca. And the partner zapping mechanic on this game is extraordinary. It's one of the best parts of Resident Evil 0, because the amount of creativity involved with this mechanic and the speedrun potential it provides is awesome. Because what I could have done for that room is I could have brought both Billy and Rebecca into the room. I could have told Rebecca to wait. I could have grabbed the microfilm, swapped back to Rebecca, linked the two characters together, and then just went through the door after I swapped back to Rebecca. And I could have just completely skipped that entire room. That is so cool. But anyway, we have both the microfilms now. And because I have the lighter fluid, I can get the white wings. And I made a mistake here. I forgot to take the knife with me because I'm going to be using the knife for a rather risky strategy to deal with the two zombies in the white wing room. So I bring Rebecca with me. I'm going the wrong way. But it gets back to me, and now I just head back through this door. And I give Billy the knife, but I'm about to make another mistake again because I completely cluttered Billy's inventory, so now I have to go back into this room again and arrange my inventory. This is one of the challenges with playing Resident Evil 0. The inventory management on this game is a pain, and that's definitely one thing I can agree with when it comes to Server 17's claims on that system. Like, the characters are never given enough space to hold a lot of items, and you have to pick up a lot of items in this game, and trying to manage your inventory between two partners is incredibly clunky, and it definitely takes a lot of time away from the game, so you have to really make sure you're managing your inventory correctly if you want to allow the game to proceed more smoothly. So go ahead and use the lighter on this candle here so that we can unlock this door. And the strategy I'm about to use is a little risky. I'm going to move forward slightly to bait the zombie to move. I'm going to get behind him. He's going to try to grab me, but if you get up here fast enough, they will never attack you because you get iframes when you're mantling. And I'm just going to proceed to knife them. I recommend not getting too close. I don't know if these zombies have the ability to vomit. I know the ones in the train do, because I tried to knife zombies while I was on a staircase, and they just started vomiting on me. So that didn't work out, unfortunately. I mean, pretty much the zombies will only vomit if you're above them or below them. So if there's any kind of change to your elevation, they will try to vomit on you. They will never try to grab you because they cannot properly initiate the grab animation when you're above or below them. And you gotta be careful here because the vomit does have a lot of range, more so than what it appears to be. So bear that in mind when you're doing the knife strategy just then. Here is the white wing. And then I'm going to get the grenade rounds in here. And even though I did waste 4 grenade rounds on those plague crawlers, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. Because in the grand scheme of things, I don't really find a lot of opportunities to use the grenade rounds. I mean, originally, before I started doing this walkthrough, I used the grenade launcher and the shotgun against the Centurion boss because I didn't quite understand how the boss worked. It felt like my grenade launcher and shotgun were doing inconsistent damage, and I assumed the boss was getting invulnerability frames, but that's not the case. It's very strange. I don't know how to describe it, but I just watched Carcinogen STA's video, and I saw him kill the Centurion boss with just the pistol, so I started doing that strategy from now on hard difficulty. And it worked consistently, so I never used the grenade launcher and the shotgun against the Centurion ever again. So I can't really think of any other situation where the grenade rounds would be useful. The only other part I can think of is the final boss, because the final boss demands every weapon at your disposal if you want to no damage it, because that fight is a very RNG heavy fight if you want to try to do it no damage, because there's no telling whether Marcus will hit you with his acid attack or not. There's no telling you know, whether the fight's going to go the way you want it to. It's a fight you gotta damage race, and that's why you need all the weapons at your disposal, and keeping the boss off of Rebecca can be pretty annoying. So that's definitely a spot where I would use the grenade rounds. You know, there's a lot of moments on this game where it's very easy to take damage, and I had originally thought about doing a live stream, but I could decide to do a walkthrough instead. I mean, originally I did do several live streams of Resident Evil 0, but I kept taking damage so much I was not impressed by the performance, so I just deleted the live streams. And I haven't done a live stream ever since of Resident Evil 0, and then I decided to do a walkthrough of this game. And this is a lot better, because then I won't forget the strategies I implemented to do a no damage walkthrough of this game. And not only that, but just covering Resident Evil 0, it definitely appeals to my true Resident Evil instinct. You know, like, I don't like it when people have these one-sided views as to what Resident Evil game they like. The amount of people that like only the older Resident Evil games and not the newer ones, and then the amount of people that like the newer ones over the older ones, I don't like that kind of biased mindset when it comes to the Resident Evil series. And by having this biased mindset, you're demonstrating that you don't understand what makes a Resident Evil game, and you don't understand the good and bad things of the Resident Evil games that you don't like. You know, I want to avoid that. I don't want to be like those people. Like, that's apparent with Carcinogen STA, that's apparent with Ballback Soup. You know, those guys play nothing but the older Resident Evil games, and they're so biased against the newer ones because they're not willing to accept change. You know, they want to stay in the past. They want to only play the games that they remember from their childhood. And that just goes to show that they are very ignorant when it comes to how innovative the newer Resident Evil games are, or how cool the older Resident Evil games were. And that is just something I will not accept in a true Resident Evil player. So many people consider them true Resident Evil players, but I severely disagree with that. Their biased mindset is something that completely goes against the very nature of a true Resident Evil player. And I don't have that at all. I love all the Resident Evil games equally. I mean, there are certain Resident Evil games that have bigger flaws than other Resident Evil games, and it's a problem. But at the end of the day, I can come to appreciate what this particular Resident Evil game did better than others, and what those other Resident Evil games did that was pretty cool. You know, Resident Evil as a whole is a gaming series that I consider to be the very series that started gaming. It's the series that did so many innovative things that no other game could ever achieve, and it's that series that has caused a lot of game developers to take influences from. The amount of people that take influences from Resident Evil 1 when it comes to survival horror, the amount of people that utilize the over-the-shoulder perspective that Resident Evil 4 introduced, you know, and the Resident Evil series is all about evolution. They never try to stick to one model. They only stick to the model that works. They stick to a model that benefits not only the survival horrorness, but also the mechanical potential and advancement, and that benefits the evolutionary aspect of each Resident Evil game. They never try to make each Resident Evil game feel the same. I mean, they originally did, but then when Resident Evil 4 came out, like, Shinji Mikami understood that Resident Evil was kind of becoming the same, and he wanted to make things different. And then because of that, Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 were very different. You know, Resident Evil Revelations felt different. And then 7 was a big change. They went from the third-person camera to the first-person camera, and that was a really cool idea. 7 had so many cool ideas that are not recognized by a lot of people. They instead call it a rip-off of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it just feels very uninspired, but they're just idiots. They only judge that based on one scene from Resident Evil 7 where you're just using a chainsaw. What a bunch of idiots. But by being biased against certain Resident Evil games, you're not appreciating the evolutionary aspect of the Resident Evil series. And I'm probably the only Resident Evil player that's capable of appreciating all of the Resident Evil games for what they are. I can accept the fact that this Resident Evil game is different than another. I mean, what I can't accept is when it goes against the mechanical, like, mindset that the Resident Evil series is known for, and that's what happened with Resident Evil 2 Remake. But at the end of the day, it's still a fun game. It may not be the Resident Evil game I imagine, and it may not be as interesting as the other Resident Evil games, but it's still a pretty fun game to come back to every so often. And I can appreciate that. But now that we've got the black wings, we're going to go ahead and place the black wings on the black statue. And this will be the end of the video. I apologize I haven't been talking about Resident Evil 0 much, or what's been happening on this video. But there's been so many walkthroughs of Resident Evil 0 that I'm just mainly using this walkthrough not only to deliver good strategies, but to also deliver my own thoughts as well. This is just the proper medium, not only to discuss my thoughts on Resident Evil 0, but also about the other Resident Evil games as well, and really make these fine comparisons as a true Resident Evil player would. And I just feel like it demands a lot of talk. It demands a lot of expression of thoughts when it comes to the Resident Evil series. But we now have both the statues, and the puzzle is completed, and the basement is unlocked. And I'll continue the basement in the next video. Well, fun thing to note, this particular puzzle was actually an Easter egg in The Evil Within 2, because one of Stefano Valentini's paintings was this particular puzzle. It showed a black and white statue on a scale. I think Shinji Mikami was trying to hint towards that particular puzzle from Resident Evil 0, so that was a nice homage to Resident Evil 0 and The Evil Within 2. But now I'm just going to take the grenade launcher and deposit the additional grenade rounds. You're going to need the shotgun for the basement sequence, because there's going to be a lot of spiders coming up. And there's going to be monkeys as well, so be prepared. Stay tuned for that in the next video. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.